Well, hello and good evening, good afternoon, even good morning to all of you out there who are chiming in and listening and joining us for this webinar today. I would love to see where you are coming from, where you are joining us from. Pop that in the chat. Also, if you could take this time to also go through our questionnaire and answer those questions so we can know what it is that you are looking forward to for this webinar. And speaking of this webinar, our topic today is genomics and women's health, really looking at personalized approaches to hormonal balance and wellness. And I have the great honor and pleasure of hosting today's webinar with my dear, brilliant colleague, Dr. Bryce Wylde. Hello, thank you for joining us today.
I love spending time with you on the air and otherwise. You're just a delight, and it's an honor and pleasure to be talking about women's health with you this evening, Dr. Varden. And I got to say, anytime I'm lecturing on the topic or writing on the topic, I always feel this like innate need to justify myself as a male equipped to speak about health related issues relevant to women. And I gotta say, in my 25 years of clinical practice, it is not sometimes, not quite often, I would say almost always the female matriarch of the family unit that is coming into my practice, asking about health and insights and help, not just for herself but her whole family. So I've just become, and I'm blessed to be not only an advocate for women's health but also somewhat expert after those 25 years. So there's my little mini sort of justification to start this off. I am qualified to speak about female health, and particularly as they relate to hormones. So anyways, it's an honor and pleasure to be talking with you and
So,
everyone who's
so you
joining us.
must have been like, what, 5 years old when you started doing this?
Do you know what? I had such a baby face. I am 50 now, but I had such a baby face starting in clinical practice. Here was my white lie. You ready? Because of course we had internship, and we had to see patients for the second 2 years, second through fourth years of my postgrad. I, entering into first year practice, would always say I have seen patients for the last 2 years, which wasn't a lie. It was true, but I had to say something because I was in fact such a very young 27-year-old at the time practitioner. Anyway, I digress. Most importantly, of course, folks that are joining us this evening, you want to dive into the poll. It's really important we need to understand your primary objectives being here this evening. We want to speak to any and all of your questions and interests. So we've got all kinds of wonderful questions, including what your primary interest in this webinar is, understanding hormone balance, learning about reproductive health, exploring genomics and personalized health. That's Dr. Varden, my expertise, general interest in women's health. We want to cover it all, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. And, we really want to focus the information, to our audience. What are you interested in? We are here for you. But even within that, we do have, general information that we are going to be covering. We're going to be exploring the role of genomics in women's health. Looking and talking about what we offer, the genes that we look at, the pathways that we look at in our hormone reports. Also, understanding how your unique genetic makeup can actually lead to personalized approaches for managing hormone balance, for reproductive health, for overall wellness. And it's so important because really, when it comes down to it, it's like, okay, we've got problems, we've got issues, or we're going through change of life. I mean, I just went through menopause, and, I personally, I do this for a living, but yet I still have questions and I'm constantly wanting to learn and know, but it still comes down to, what can I do about it? Give me some action items, give me some insights on, what I can start implementing in my life regularly on a daily basis. And that's what we're going to be talking about too.
And there's so much.
Yeah.
And there really is so much. And we're armed more in the last 5 years, I think, than we've ever been in decades of research. Part of that, of course, is the Women's Health Initiative, which was
Mhm.
launched back in the early 90s, one of the most extensive studies focusing on postmenopausal women's health. Here's a little factoid, though. I was just lecturing about menopause the other day. And it dawned on me to, I guess, sort of bring to people's attention that we've only lived more than on average 45 years. That's men and women. By the way, men go through andropause, a version of menopause. We lose our testosterone quite quickly, actually, as of age 35. But nonetheless, the human species hasn't lived to be much beyond 45 years of age on average for more than the last 300 years. So solving these issues, cracking the code around, hormonal balance and certainly hormones into menopause, that's an endeavor. And we do it well at the DNA company. Genomics. I mean, we've only mapped the human genome as of April 2001, thereabouts. And the insights that we can draw from these insights are just incredible. But the Women's Health Initiative, I mean, I think it's brought back to light a lot of questions, for people. I think it's this really comprehensive research that's significantly at least influenced medical guidelines and public health policies as of late. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I am so glad that we have, you know, uh, these insightful doctors and scientists really reassessing the studies, seeing the massive limitations, and the jumping to conclusions, when the study did come out, and scaring the bejesus out of, all of these doctors, these prescribing doctors, being so scared to offer bioidentical hormone therapy, or any type of hormone therapy to women during that transition, of perimenopause, menopause, when you really start diving into the studies and really dissecting, what the reality was,
Yeah.
that there wasn't the type of uh, problems with breast cancer, that it really was only a difference of one person more, getting it in that hormone group, and just blowing it out of proportion. And we just lost a whole group of women, my mother included, that lost out on the benefits, of hormone replacement during that transition time. Actually, we had a conversation about that just the other day, because she actually had a hysterectomy, when
Hmm.
she was 57 years old. She's 81 now. And the doctor had initially put her on hormone replacement, and then very short order took her off, because that's when that study had come out,
Mm.
and very scared about it. And she's never been, on any kind of hormone replacement since then. So it's like, thankfully, she is quite healthy. I mean, and that leads into the genetic aspect. Well, and lifestyle, diet, everything else. But who knows what other benefits, could have been helpful, maybe if she had been on it sooner. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to get on bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. But there's another thing with the Women's Health Initiative. They didn't use bioidentical.
Well, that's it, Sam. I was going to say I didn't want to interrupt that excellent insight, but yeah, I that not only is it so important to understand yourself from a genetic perspective, because there still are some risks for certain people, but there's no one sort of fits all, and that's our slogan. But yeah, bioidentical. I mean, and now the research, which is seemingly very compelling, if not almost conclusive, around it, helping to stave off Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. And I think it's important, as you're, I think, maybe alluding to. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the long term data extrapolation from the Women's Health Initiative indicated that women who begin hormone therapy closer to the onset of menopause, right? So when that sort of starts, the earlier you do it, when you're qualified, and I think that's an important
Right,
underscoring,
right.
experience more favorable, benefit risk profile compared to those who start a lot later. I think that underscores the importance of personalized medical decisions regarding genetic insights or genomic pathway insights to hormone therapy? Something we'll cover.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, we also have to realize that when we talk about hormones, it's not just about estrogen,
Right.
testosterone, cortisol is also a very important hormone in that whole cycle. And there was actually a study done in Frontiers of Endocrinology. It looked at chronic stress, the HPA axis, so hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis dysregulation, where those higher cortisol levels impacting menstrual cycles, sleep, weight. They found that women under chronic stress had a 40% higher chance of experiencing irregular periods, which really works into fertility. Which, I
Right.
mean, so I know we've been talking about more perimenopause, menopause, in the last, 5 minutes or so, but really looking at the majority of women still having their menstrual cycles, looking to get pregnant. If you're under a tremendous amount of stress, you are going to have your hormones, cortisol, also estrogen, testosterone, and everything else being affected because your sleep gets affected. Sleep is when our bodies make testosterone, and this works for men too. I mean, yes,
Absolutely.
we are focusing on women for this particular webinar, but this is really important. I mean, it affects all of the other aspects in our lives, in our health. And, this really works into what we look at for your genes, for the different reports that we offer in the mood and behavior. Because when we talk about stress, we can look at that section, look at how do you process experiences, information, stress, how do you find happiness? How can you best find ways to de-stress? What works best for you? So, it really is leveraging all of the systems that we look at in our reports to help the overall person that affect hormones, that
Yeah.
affect overall wellness.
And I gotta say, stress is not just mental, emotional. Um, this goes back 15 years. I unbewittingly did a TV program, a morning show, talking about detoxification and this and the pathways involved, which we heavily focus on at the DNA company, and how at the time, anyways, the latest research around endocrine disruption, hormone disruption through toxin exposure was causing a significant blip in fertility. And the call to action, anyways, myself and my sister, who's also a naturopathic doctor, was at in her early career, was at a Toronto clinic. We were together practicing brother and sister. Anyway, the call to action was come see us, and we will do some investigation into toxin levels, endocrine disruption, particularly. She focuses on infertility. And we would subsequently then work people through a detox protocol. Do you know, Dr. Varden, that we proved a twofold success in fertility? So these women that were having challenges that had been to infertility clinics versus the most successful Toronto fertility clinic, twofold. We were seeing something crazy like a 35 or some odd percent success rate post detoxification. That was it. That was the focus. There wasn't really even a hormone or there wasn't, Clomid or any of these things that were added to the protocols, just literally a detox plan and then a micronutrient boost at the end. So things like coenzyme Q10, so forth. But we were seeing endocrinological improvements, people that were seemingly having challenges getting pregnant, all of a sudden getting pregnant post detox.
That is amazing. No, I didn't know that. And congratulations to you and
Yeah.
your sister. That is fantastic.
We were running a pseudo infertility clinic for a couple of months thereafter. Anyway, she's since taken a strong focus on that. But stress can be physical,
Yeah.
and toxins are physical stress, and they can interrupt and actually significantly hinder some of the pathways within, the endocrine system, the hormones that are necessary at certain levels in order to become pregnant and have success. Not to mention, vitamin D should otherwise probably be called a hormone.
Oh, yeah.
It's a vitamin. It's been classified as vitamin for a long time, but it acts like a hormone. So if we consider all these different things, the entire what we call steroidal hormone pathway, so that's progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, and so forth. But we should be considering certain things related to the nervous system, including cortisol, we call mood and behavior, executive function. These are hormone. They regulate hormones from a top-down perspective. So it's really this whole body composition that we pay most attention to, not just, to your point, sex steroidal hormones.
Yeah. And yeah, touching on the vitamin D, hormone D, the importance cannot be understated. I mean, this is, for example, vitamin D and estrogen. Vitamin D actually enhances the activity of the enzyme aromatase, which is that enzyme that converts androgens, testosterone, into estrogens. Really important. So for women who may be, androgen dominant, or, again, going through a little bit of that change of life where their estrogen is, dipping lower, making sure your vitamin D levels are up there, you can actually help to upregulate that to make your genes and these enzymes work more optimally. I mean, when you're talking about, I know we did a webinar on PCOS and endometriosis, and there is a connection with PCOS. Women who have it have low vitamin D levels because it's contributing to like insulin resistance and hormone imbalances.
Right.
There's just so many aspects that vitamin D works into, when you also consider that it is relevant and important to over 10% of all of our protein coding genes. There's over 22,000 protein coding genes. So you're looking at over 2,200 genes that need vitamin hormone D, for the best processing and regulation of that. Before we start diving in a little deeper, I was wondering if our little angels in the background can bring up our poll, so that way we can see where and what our audience, where their interests lie. Thank
There we
you
go.
very much. So our first question was, what is your primary interest in this webinar? And we have about equal interest in understanding hormonal balance, as well as exploring the genomics and personalized health aspects of it. And we have a few people who just want to know about general interest in women's health, and a little bit more asking about learning about reproductive health. So now we know where to focus our efforts.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what we're all about. Functional medicine, pathway genomics at the DNA company emphasizes personalized nutrition plans, stress reduction. You heard Dr. Varden talk about targeted exercise routines, supplements, and in some cases, what is best for hormone replacement, typically bioidentical, and what stages to enhance hormonal harmony, let's call it, from pre to peri to post-menopause. I mean, all ages and stages, considering very specifically individual health history, genetic predispositions, environmental factors. All of this plays a role. So we'll take a real focus on understanding hormonal balance and exploring genomics and personalized health in that context. We're also seeing, quite a skew toward somewhat familiarity when asked the question, what is your current level of familiarity around genomics? So there's a lot of folks somewhere in the middle there. Some are saying very, I'm sure you've taken our test, so congratulations. And some are not at all. It's very new to them, about 21%, but 70 or so percent are in the middle there, somewhat familiar. So ask questions, all of you, but in particular, those questions that will further clarify anything that's sort of you're not sure about, because that's what we're here for you for.
And for our third question, we asked of all of you, have you experienced or are you currently experiencing health challenges related to hormone imbalance or reproductive health. And more than half of you said yes. And you are actively seeking solutions. So thank you for being here. And we hope that you will gain some wonderful insights and pearls of wisdom from this information. We also have about a quarter of you saying no, but you are interested in prevention. And, a smaller portion saying, yep, and you are managing it well. And we are so glad to have you here. We hope that you might even learn something new and then turn around and maybe implement that yourself or help others to continue their education in it. And finally, we have what women's health topics are you most concerned about? Here we've got a pretty even um, display across topics for managing hormonal changes, menopause, PCOS, things that we've already touched upon a little bit, as well as preventing long-term health risks. So the osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, as well as general wellness and longevity. This is beautiful because they really all interweave together. So beautiful. Thank you so much for filling that out. And if you do have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A. We'd be more than happy to be answering those, as we're going. So, please put your questions in the Q&A. Something I want to bring up before we dive a little more specifically into some of those genes that we've been mentioning, our reports, that we are kicking off a new program at the beginning of the new year. And that is DNA for Women program. Now, this program is designed to bridge critical gaps in women's healthcare by offering personalized, genetics-informed approach to address unique health challenges that we as women face. We are recognizing that standard of medicine practices are often overlooking women's distinct needs. That's why we've created the DNA for Women. This really combines state-of-the-art diagnostic tools like using the Dutch Complete Hormone Test, a full metabolic panel, our Gut 360 microbiome analysis, and we really take that and target interventions to support optimal health. And this program involves 4 clinical visits with 2 telemedicine follow-ups. We have personalized hormone treatments, which are purchased separately, but the program really provides an in-depth understanding on each woman's health, because even though we are all women, well, sorry, Bryce, because we are all women, we are still individuals, and it's still very important to understand those individual personalized needs. And it really is a matter of empowering each of us to take control of our wellness journey with precision care that fits your unique journey. So again, we are kicking this off the beginning of the new year. If you want to be on our wait list for this program, please reach out to the CEO and we'll drop this in the chat, the email, it's ceo@thednacompany.com. And, we will get you on the wait list for that program. So wanted to give a plug to that. I'm really excited that we are going to be doing this. So without further ado, though, let's
speaking of the XX versus the XY, of course, I carry a Y, quite evidently. But that's actually how I typically start this story off with my patients, that it's in fact nothing to do with male versus female. It has everything to do with female health. And of course, it has got a lot to do with male health as well. But it's not the story of male versus female as much as it is what makes us within our gender unique to how the hormonal pathway plays out. So what I mean by that is ultimately we all, male or female, XY or XX, actually genetically have exactly the same steroidal hormone pathway. And depending on certain gene variations within that pathway is what makes us further unique within our gender. So, for example, we all take this master hormone, cholesterol. In fact, again, kind of like vitamin D can be considered more like a hormone or a signaling agent than just a lipid. But from cholesterol, we manufacture pregnenolone. And then from pregnenolone, kind of think of this like a waterfall that branches off into different creeks and ravines and pools and lakes. But from this, we all manufacture progesterone, to be oversimplified about it. And then from progesterone, we all make testosterone. And then from that, we all actually make estrogen. And from estrogen, then we break them down into various amounts of metabolites. This is all very purposeful. And then we break those metabolites down and make them water soluble so that we can pee them out, poop them out, sweat them out, and breathe them out. But here's the thing, at each of those different stages, how we metabolize and take one hormone and produce the next downstream hormone is the variation and what makes us unique within our genetics. And that's what we study. And so, each of us, as women or men, can be thought of as sitting on a spectrum of speed of which we all transition through that hormonal cascade. And that is the story. So the speed at which you convert from progesterone into testosterone, from testosterone into the very potent, virulent dihydrotestosterone. Some of us faster than others. It turns out part of the story, for example, for the average individual with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, they are more often than not converting into dihydrotestosterone in a speed at which it is quite quick, and often even retaining a lot of that DHT. And that's not the full picture and being oversimplified, but just give you one example. Or within a spectrum of androgen versus estrogen dominance. And by the way, a lot of folks in, women in menopause, they don't necessarily realize this. Dr. Varden, I know you know this all too well. How one experiences menopause is a little less relevant to how mom or even grandma did it, and so much more relevant to your genes by virtue of where you've come from. If you are estrogen dominant, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, we can come back to this, but if you're estrogen dominant as a female, that is to say you convert progesterone into testosterone quickly, testosterone into estrogen quickly, that sort of qualifies as estrogen dominant. If you come from a place of estrogen dominance, you typically hit that wall in menopause quicker than a female that's come from more androgen dominance their whole life. They're going to have a slower, steadier, I guess more relinquishing, easier, if you will, menopausal transition. So the story of how we produce and metabolize hormones is everything when it comes to ultimately how you might experience certain predispositions to reproductive health issues, metabolic disorders, mood and mental health challenges as they relate to hormones, menopause, of course, aging, and how we all age at different sort of speeds and manners, even our skin, hair, all of that is relevant. Sleep, as you've mentioned, cardiovascular health. I mean, the list is long, right? It's a long laundry list as it pertains to how hormones are going to, play a role, and the speed at which we metabolize them plays a very important role as to how we experience certain symptoms and predispositions to hormone relevant conditions.
And I want to mention, you know, actual specific genes that we're talking about, because you talked about the conversion, the speed of which, like progesterone, these androgens turn into testosterone. So for those of you who have done your DNA 360 reports, this would be your CYP17A1 gene. So that's CYP17A1. That is the gene that determines the rate of conversion of progesterone into testosterone. So if that is increased in any way, that will let us know that you have a dominant profile. Now, when you're looking at your particular hormone profile, that determines balanced or dominance. So if you have that conversion be slow, then you would have a balanced profile. If it's fast in any way, then it's a dominant profile. But where we determine, oh, are you androgen dominant? Are you estrogen dominant? Like Bryce was talking about, these are things that we have to look at the other pathways that testosterone takes. How fast, how slow, what's the overall picture? So he was talking about how testosterone is converted into dihydrotestosterone. Now, dihydrotestosterone is 3 to 5 times more potent than testosterone itself. It's kind of like testosterone on steroids. And how fast do you do that? Now, the gene that you're looking at is the SRD5A2 gene. Now, for women, we generally want that to be slower. So this would be like a CC presentation. But if some women have a little bit faster, that can lead them into more androgen dominance. And you also have to look at how quickly is your testosterone, are the androgens cleared? These are your glucuronidation pathway, your UGT genes. And there's a couple that we look at along with the, I think it's the CYP3A4 gene, which also helps with that clearance. So it's kind of like this group together, this pathway. How quickly do you clear? And also, how well do you bind to the androgen receptor? This is the AR gene. So this is something that plays a part in determining your dominance, if you are a dominant profile or a balanced profile, because you could be estrogen balanced, you could be, androgen balanced, or just plain old balanced, very nuanced. But then also, how quickly do you convert testosterone to estrogen? That is where the aromatase comes in, that I had mentioned earlier. And that would be the CYP19A1 gene. That tells you how fast that conversion happens. So it really is a language, in this team that plays together. Genes do not exist in a vacuum. They really work as a team. They work as a pathway. And it's understanding how all of these players work together that then determines genetically your hormone profile. I tell clients, though, when it comes to hormones, this is probably the most nuanced system. It is also the most delicate. It's kind of like a teeter-totter with a very, tiny spot in order to be balanced, because diet, lifestyle, toxic load, like what you and your sister found, can make all of the difference into helping a woman go from infertile to fertility. That your hormones, even though you have a genetic profile to it, you may not actually present that way in your blood work, in say a Dutch test, which is dried urine test for complete hormones, because of aspects of heavy metal toxicity or other types of toxicities or stress or endocrine disruptors, being products that
Yeah.
have these estrogen mimetics. We're talking phthalates, triclosan, BPA. All of these things can really throw off our hormones.
Oh,
And
it's
I'm sure
so
you
true.
found this.
I mean, look, that first step in the production, the CYP, which by the way stands for cytochrome P450, which is a huge, major, very complex enzymatic biochemical process in the body responsible for so many things, including how you break down certain drugs. But in those first steps, estrogen into testosterone, or testosterone into estrogen, and so forth, those are key in understanding the foundation. But moving downstream, and understanding estrogen breakdown, and even xenoestrogens, right, or environmental estrogens that you're referring to, this is where things get interesting, right? I mean, we call E2, E4, E16. This is really where that balance of these, what we know as metabolites, play a huge role in health. So I like to refer to E2 as sort of the Goldilocks estrogen. It's the perfect balance you were talking about, supporting fertility, bone health, mood. Estradiol And when that's bioidentical, by the way, full circle to what we were talking about, that's when there's magic. When you're a little bit low for that guy, or let's call it gal, then you're a little, then you got problems. But E4, a little gentler, if you will, is, protective during pregnancy, less active otherwise, but the ratios of E2 to E4 and E2 to E16, E16 is the troublemaker, E4 and E16. This is where too much of this stuff can promote, let's call it growth in tissues where there shouldn't be, like breast or uterine tissue. And furthermore, if you're producing a lot of the estrogen upstream, and now you're not breaking it down into the favorable two, right? You have excess 4, excess 16. That's the big C. That's what we get concerned about. We call this affectionately estrotoxic, right? A little bit too much of that. And that's influenced also by things from the external environment, just like Dr. Varden was talking about. And now downstream, it's detox time, right? What's your liver, what's your body doing to actually get rid of any of those metabolites? Everything has to become water soluble to pee out, poop out, sweat, and breathe out. So once estrogens have done their job, and by the way, as a guy, I've got estrogen in me too. Frankly, I am actually of the male varietal estrogen dominant, meaning I probably have my head of hair until late age. And it's harder for me to put on muscle mass, a couple of what we call phenotypic traits as an estrogen dominant male that I feature. But in me, in you, once estrogens have done their job, the body needs to detoxify them, eliminate them safely, package them up, get them water soluble. This is where glutathione, the detox ingredient, plays a role. So where GST and the genes we look at very meaningfully, and COMT, by the way, COMT, catechol methyltransferase, how you take, this is the cleanup crew. So GSTs, they're like the vacuum cleaner. They neutralize all the harmful estrogen and, produce that ultimately, when left unchecked, will produce oxidative stress and oxidative damage. The reason you're told to eat more blueberries, and antioxidants in your diet. And COMT, think of this almost like the as the final recycler, helps to deactivate and flush out the 416, the angry estrogens. So if you have low COMT, by the way, that affects your mood behavior to some degrees, because it's responsible for clearing catecholamines like dopamine as well. But you might feel, anxious, moody, stressed. But the more estrogen lingers longer than it should, it plays a role in almost every single condition related to hormone imbalance. So genomics, understanding them, what they are unique to you, our 360, it helps you to take control. It's your instruction manual. It's how your hormones are balanced, how they're working, the speed of metabolism, how quickly you clear them. And not just do you produce excess cellulite. That's kind of interesting to know and what you can do about it. Or how might you experience menopause, or how you offset those symptoms. But it's all the way through to avoiding or helping to mitigate, let's call it, the big C, right? Cancer. I mean, it's that impactful.
And I want to dive into the weeds just a little bit when it comes to those genes that you were referencing. Sorry. So when you were talking about the different estrogen metabolites, the 2-hydroxyestrone, 4-hydroxyestrone, 16-alpha-hydroxyestrone, the genes that you'd be looking at in your DNA hormone report, excuse me, would be the CYP1A1 gene that produces the 2-hydroxyestrone. The CYP1B1 gene produces the 4-hydroxyestrone, and the CYP3A4 gene produces the 16-alpha-hydroxyestrone. Now, the important thing, excuse me, in the detoxification, that metabolization, the methylation process, like you were saying with the COMT gene, the COMT gene, that is really important, because the 2-hydroxy and the 4-hydroxyestrone metabolites need to be methylated. The 2-hydroxyestrone has to be methylated in order to be more helpful, to be better bioactive for those beneficial aspects that it provides. The 4-hydroxyestrone, which has strong estrogenic effects and therefore more inflammatory, needs to be methylated to not become or stay a quinone that can actually attach to DNA and cause DNA damage. And that is what leads to the big C, to that cancer and cancer cells.
Yep.
So we need to have that methylation working, because what it does is it helps convert that 4-hydroxyestrone, breaking it down to make it more water soluble, so then we can excrete it from the system. If your methylation pathway is not working well, guess what? You're not doing those things. So supporting your methylation pathway, a major detoxification pathway, like what Dr. Bryce and his sister were doing. They focused on detoxification, but in that, they were actually supporting the hormone pathways. They were making everything work well. They were removing the wrenches and these problems to allow for the natural homeostasis and balance of hormone health. So all of these work together. And like I had mentioned, with glucuronidation, the UGT genes, very important for that clearance. You don't want these hormones to constantly build and get out of balance. So very, very important. Now I'm hoping that you can start realizing how important the detoxification pathways are to hormone health. And you can find how your detoxification pathways are by looking in the anti-inflammatory reports in your DNA 360. So let's mention, and I know I didn't get into the GST genes for glutathione conjugation, which are also very important in hormone health clearance and everything else. But say someone is off balance. Okay. They're producing more of these metabolic estrogens. Okay. Or in the report, genetically speaking, they are and have a higher estrogen toxicity risk. What are some of the things that you generally recommend or offer? Again, educational purposes only. This is not a directive, because we are here. We are not your doctors, may be doctors, but just things in research that have been found to be helpful for the regulation of these metabolites.
Yeah, I'd say the one, well, there's a few, but the one sort of almost immediate go-to when my eyes pick up on a inverse ratio, which I'll be real simple with this. If 2 is green lit, meaning it's favorable, you're 2 metabolite, and you're producing more of this protective estradiol, then I'm happy. But if at the same time your 4 and 16 are green lit, which by the way is a rare combination, I'm going to want to do something to kind of slow that down. Where I get concerned is if 2 is red lit, or let's call it very slow, that metabolic pathway is slowed down. So the favorable 2 is slow. And then I see a green lit 4 and 16, meaning you're producing a lot more 4 and a lot more 16 hydroxyestrogens, not so favorable. My head automatically thinks about the cruciferous family of vegetables, which is, cabbage, kale, mustard greens, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, etc. Why? Because found within this wonderful varietal of vegetables are ingredients that are known as sulforaphane, indole 3 carbinol, and diindolylmethane, which the literature scientific supports very heavily an increased conversion from 4 or 16 into the protective 2. So it almost flips that switch, almost speeds up, if you will, the more favorable 2 and slows down the less favorable 4 and 16. And depending on lower down, if I also see a female challenged not only in that ratio, but also glutathionization, the ability to produce glutathione through the GST genes, I'm going to want to upregulate that clearance and detoxification, particularly as it relates to the maybe estrogen toxic situation by adding calcium D-glucarate. And so this is not calcium. This is something that helps to bind, if you will, we'll oversimplify it, and pull out excess bad estrogens. That's tip of the iceberg stuff. Of course, there are polyphenols, there's resveratrol, there's all kinds of things that come from the purple varietal of fruits, fruit skins, taro stilbene, which is spelled PTERO, STILBENE, quercetin, bioflavonoids. Here's the thing, though. The caveat is, all too well, Dr. Varden, is that you often can't really eat yourself to therapeutic range. And so what I mean by that is when you see these, let's call them genomic glitches or variations that are not necessarily so favorable, it would be it would be impossible to ever eat enough bowls of the cruciferous family, or for that matter, enough berries to ever shift that ratio. So that's where we go to supplementation. That's where we selectively choose these ingredients that help shift that pathway in your favor. Well, that's where my head goes to first, anyway.
Well, honestly, I think that that kind of information is so important because a lot of this is just good general health,
Sure.
ways that we can support. Of course, it's always wonderful to be able to know that information, how your genes work, and to work with someone who knows the nuances, because sometimes it's not like you want to run out there and go eat a bunch of broccoli sprouts with high sulforaphane. And even though, like you said, hard to eat your way uh, for therapeutic ranges, but if someone is already balanced in that, we don't want to throw off the balance by going overboard with some of these supplements or eating too much. So this is where test, don't guess.
Right.
Look at your
Know
gene,
your numbers.
see exactly, know your numbers, not just in your genetics, but what is your current presentation, blood work, urine, whatever other testing may be available, and for what that particular doctor is familiar with and that they can utilize to have the data to know your numbers.
Oh, absolutely.
But I
I feel
definitely
like,
go ahead.
no, please finish the
Well,
thought. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
I wanted to, kind of circle back that it's not just the proactive usage of supplementation or support, but also like we were talking about in the beginning, what your sister and you had done with detoxification. It's also a matter of lowering your toxic load in mitigation. Find out, where are these toxins coming from? Because, we all have a toxic bucket. There's always toxins dripping into that bucket, and we want to be able to empty it faster than it's filling. That's where our detoxification systems come in. So we want to support the liver. We want to make sure our lymphatics are flowing and draining. We want to make sure that we are doing all of the things. And I love Dr. Stephanie's Asian Nation, urination, defecation, perspiration, respiration, all of these things in order for us to release the toxins. That is emptying our bucket. But sometimes our bucket, it's not just drips. It's like a fire hose filling up way faster than we're able to empty it. And it's not that we are disempowered, like nothing we can do. Now, granted, we do live in a very toxic world, and all of the toxins and chemicals that we are exposed to. I mean, I've seen ranges into the tens of thousands of chemical toxins that we are exposed to on a daily basis, in our air, water, food, everywhere. But if we are educated and made aware of where these things are, then let's control the controllables. Let's see, where can we lower our toxic exposures, because many of these things, like I had mentioned earlier, are endocrine disruptors, estrogen mimetics, meaning that these chemicals act like estrogens, okay, act like hormones in our bodies, in our receptors, really throwing things off. And this is why we see these very young girls, as young as like 8 years old, starting their menstrual cycle. I mean, that was unheard of years and years ago, it was more like in the teen years. So it's being able to recognize, where are these toxins coming from? So
Phthalates are doing it. Phthalates,
yep,
found in, like, these overly smelly. Everything's overly smelly, and it doesn't smell good to me either. But there's xenoestrogens. There are hormonal mimetics, as you're talking about. There are hormones in our food supply. It's too much, regardless as to your genetic predisposition, one way or the other. So I really feel like the environment, and you're right. This is not alarmist talk. This is that manage what you can. And by the way, that kind of makes me feel like, what are we even doing at the DNA company? Like, to summarize, we're trying to, in effect, bridge uh, the healthcare gap, because there's a serious one. It's not just, I have a problem, I need a solution. It's for women, this is a personalized blueprint. It's an instruction manual. What's the problem? Uh, a lot of women are experiencing like symptoms that lead to hormonal health imbalance. So and that's often dismissed, by the way, or even generalized. So we can PCOS. We talked a little bit about endometriosis, menopause related issues, infertility, often misdiagnosed or undertreated. So what's the solution? Genomics. So genetic testing is going to provide a personalized health blueprint under what's the word, uncovering, I guess, individual genetic predispositions that influence hormone metabolism, fertility, chronic disease risks, right? The other issue is traditional medicine often relies on trial and error approaches, right? Particularly with hormonal therapies. And that leads to tremendous amounts of frustration and unnecessary prolonged suffering in a lot of folks. So the solution, again, is genomic insights. Testing can identify variations in genes that influence how your body, a female body, is processing hormones, and for that matter, medications. Really important. A lot of these pathways go down these pathways are responsible for not just estrogen metabolism, but also some of the drugs that you're taking. We run a really wonderful test called a pharmacogenomics panel. So if you're taking medication, often it's hindering the hormone pathways, but depending on how you process your hormones is also going to provide insight into how you process drugs, and vice versa. And I think there's like this, I'm just going to say, third thing, and that's addressing the emotional and mental health impact. So
yeah,
women are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience anxiety, depression, hormonal transitions. We do andropause, but it's not the same degree as menopause. So yet these mental health concerns are stress or biological factors. But the solution is understanding executive function, mood, behavior, and the hormones that are related and backstep to that. And by the way, I can't forget this. This is maybe even more important, and that's empowerment through knowledge. So women are as active participants in their care and their family's care than anybody. And I think that I'm speaking on behalf of women here, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but I feel like many women feel slightly sidelined in that decision making about their health because of the lack of information, or maybe even dismissive attitudes from their providers. I still think that plagues healthcare in this day and age. So if you're armed with genomics, you're armed with detailed reports on what makes you tick, I think you can better advocate for yourself. Here, I have proof that this hormone replacement therapy is good for me. I need more or less of it, right? So anyway, those are my thoughts.
well,
I
they're
tangented. I tangented.
wonderful. You're fine. And they are very supportive and valid thoughts. And I'm glad that we have an advocate in you, for women's health. And, kind of diving in a little bit for the testing, because remember, we talked about test, don't guess. Just to throw this out there, that our DNA 360 and breast 360 tests are still 15% off through midnight tonight, December 3rd. Okay. With the code B as in Bravo, F as in Frank, C as in Charlie, M as in Mary, 2024. So that's BFCM 2024, standing for Black Friday, Cyber Monday 2024.
All
So
right.
we can put that in the chat. So if you haven't yet ventured into getting your DNA 360 report, which really is a one and done. You don't need to do that again if you've already done it. But the DNA breast 360 test, that's something, if you haven't done, highly encourage you to do. But that can be, done, every, I'd say maybe once a year. Honestly, it depends on your need, your risk evaluation, but it's a great preliminary indicator that does not take the place of regular diagnostics like mammograms or anything. It's just an early awareness, especially in the younger, cohort of women that are not typically of the age that mammograms would begin. So it's wonderful. It's a tier test. We've talked about this at length in some other webinars that we've done. So you can always, go back and take a look at that. But yes, 15% off through midnight tonight. And if our little angels, when I say midnight, people are going, wait, is that going to be Eastern, Mountain, Pacific? Can you please pop that in the chat so that way I can give the correct information on which midnight. So as we are going, I'd like to jump into the Q&A. So maybe we can kind of do a back and forth on answering these. So the first question by Richard, stating many women feel unheard and overlooked in healthcare. How can genomic testing bridge this gap and provide them with the care they deserve? Now, I know we've touched on this a little bit, but if you just want to just speak into that just a little bit more.
Yeah, I think I was actually just kind of saying exactly that. It's a wonderful first question. I think arming yourself with your unique N of 1 instruction manual to best identify what interventions, what lifestyle, what dietary, what supplemental, what sleep-wake cycles, what drugs best suit your body, what hormonal replacement therapy best suits your body. And by the way, genetics, this isn't just data. Okay, this is validation and actionable insights. So I kind of think like this is where we are in this day and age. And especially this climate that's yet to come. And I don't want to predict it, but shifting this focus from dismissing symptoms. There's two people that we see in general at the DNA company, and some are in the middle. We see health seekers that have a problem they want a solution to. Right? Then we see wellness seekers that look to go from good to better. And again, some people are kind of in the middle there, but nonetheless, it's kind of the two types of people. Unfortunately, see a lot more skewed to wellness, health seekers rather, people that have a problem that are looking for a solution. So this shifts, in my opinion, this focus from dismissing symptoms when you have a problem you're looking for a solution to understanding the root causes. Right? So for women who have felt unheard, this is a science that represents them, N of 1, that they can show and share, in fact, educate their healthcare provider with, where their unique stories and their unique needs are guided at every decision: drugs, lifestyle, sleep, diet. And it's not just sort of what's trendy or what you've heard the latest women's health initiative has to say, because frankly, there are exceptions to those rules. So by integrating, I'll just sort of, frog in the throat, by integrating genetic pathways, hormonal pathways, vitamin mineral needs, executive mood, behavior and function, how you need to sleep, et cetera, into your women's care, female care, we're not just bridging the gap. I love that Richard's describing, how we do that, but this is transforming the healthcare landscape where every woman receives the care that she, N of 1, needs. That's how I would say.
And I want to validate the fact that in general healthcare, allostatic or allopathic care, which is our Western medicine, you get what? 5, if you're lucky, 15.
7 minutes, 7 on average.
Yeah, on average with your doctor.
Yeah.
How is that enough time to really know your life, your
No,
background,
single
your
symptom. It's single not used to be single system. Now it's single symptom. You can't even get an organ in there. It's like what subsect of that organ? Yeah.
exactly. And yet we do just the opposite. We'll spend an hour with you after we've already accumulated, a full intake, looking at your labs, looking at tests, we have a much better picture, of you sitting in front of us. And then we get to talk with you. You get to tell your story. You are heard. And that is the big difference with what we offer. And, I don't want to say just, the DNA company, even though I think we do a great job at it, but, working into functional medicine, holistic healthcare, because there's 8 billion people on this earth, half of them are women. We at the DNA company can't handle 4 billion people, maybe eventually, but until then, we need, an entire group of thoughtful people who look at root causes, who go beyond that 5-7 minutes of a symptom. So
Mhm.
this is really important. That's that gap. And actually it works into the next question, that Richard, wonderful questions here. Thank you so much. What role does nutrition and lifestyle modification play in optimizing health based on genetic insights? He's actually happened to have seen a lot of women switching from like carnivore diet to help with hormonal issues. And again, our reports, we do a full panel looking at diet and nutrition, a bunch of different genes that affect that, mood and behavior, how that affects food and the relationship to food, detoxification pathways, your hormones, all of these things are interconnected. But when you're talking about nutrition and lifestyle, for example, okay, carnivore diet, well, yes, this can help in some ways, but I think of these more as therapeutic diets. This isn't necessarily, very rarely is this a forever type of diet. We are dynamic. Our bodies, our environment, everything is changing. Why should our supplements and the food that we eat be static? It should be dynamic with us, still staying within a certain range that supports our genes, that supports our best lifestyle and just in general. Like, it doesn't mean that you go out and start eating highly processed sugary foods, inflammatory seed oils and stuff like this. It doesn't mean we go back to that. No. But maybe doing a carnivore diet for a certain amount of time if it is indicated for the individual sitting in front of us. But then even Dr. Paul Saladino, who is a huge proponent of the carnivore diet, wrote the book, all this other stuff. He was on a strict carnivore diet for like a year and a half, and his hormone levels, his markers started nosediving. And he was like, what's going on? And after doing a lot of research and starting to tweak, he started adding in vegetables and fruits and honey, enough that it worked well for him. Again, that modification, that dynamics of the changing body, of the environment, lifestyle, nutrition, to where his markers and everything and the way he felt went right back up into the optimal. So we have to be in tune with our bodies. And our genetics can help inform that, along with these other tests to look at. So I love these questions. Thank you so much. Our next one, let's see, asks.
I love that it's Richard too, by the way, not Roseanne. It's Richard. Maybe Roseanne's using Richard's computer. I don't know, but it's a guy who started us off with the 3 good questions, which is great.
So I'll have you field this one. So asking, can you share examples of how understanding a patient's genetic profile has transformed their care or outcome? Obviously, no names required, but maybe give us a case study that you've happened to actually work with. that you
That's
can share?
easy. I mean, it was just today. I had Mondays, I'm in clinic all day. Tuesdays, it's virtual all day. So I just came off on the heels of a very busy clinical day. And I just, well, not my last two patients, somewhere around 4 o'clock today, talking to a female in her young 20s, early 20s, very severe PMS, mood swings, that we cracked the code on through the hormonal genomic investigation and detox support. So this actually speaks exactly to what we were talking about earlier. So first of all, really quick clinical backstory: debilitating PMS, particularly the mood side, but there was the bloating, the fatigue. So traditional treatments like birth control, antidepressants, nothing. Very minimal relief, if anything. And in fact, actually, by the way, her 5-HTTL-PR variation being double S, as we know, not so conducive to SSRIs. Yeah. So, but the genetic insights were very revealing. They were very slow COMT, COMT, catechol methyltransferase, and double no variant on the GST genes, which, by the way, a couple of years ago, a clinic I ran in Toronto here called P3, where one of our co-founders of the company, Dr. Mansour Mohammed, is a part of this clinic. We saw a huge cohort, without getting into the weeds, but a huge cohort of what was considered Lyme disease, young women with Lyme disease. And we started to pick this apart and realize this wasn't actually Lyme. It was estrogen toxicity plus poor detoxification. We're like having Lyme disease. We took these women, young girls, off of birth control pill and solved their Lyme disease because it wasn't really even Lyme. We are seeing a lot of Lyme at the time. Yeah, believe it or not, that was the measure of intervention, taking them off birth control pill. And all of a sudden, now that's not going to work for everybody. I'm just saying we identified this duality of poor detox and estrogen dominant status in a group of young women also diagnosed with Lyme. Anyway, I digress, but that was just something I remembered as I was saying this sort of combination. So what did we do, or what have I been working on successfully? We added, I'm not going to get into the details, but also somewhat poor methylation. We added methylation support, some magnesium, both of which support COMT, the catechol methyltransferase. We added that indole 3-carbinol that I was telling you about, and some mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques, managing the cortisol that you were alluding to early on. You can't forget that. So I want to follow up in a couple of months, and I expect, as I've seen in many cases, PMS is going to reduce significantly. I bet you the mood swings are going to be a lot better. But I see this all the time. I don't have outcomes in this patient, but I just saw this patient today, and I know that we'll get these outcomes because I've seen it, I don't know, hundreds of times. I don't know. That's one example.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it is a beautiful thing to hear how successfully you have helped so many women. I mean, men too, but seeing that we're focusing on women, so many women. And it's amazing that just through a few changes, massive changes, benefits can come from it. Because I have worked with many women as well. And again, just looking at detoxification, looking at, helping to support their sleep, changing their diet up some, just downstream, everything else seems to just work itself out and fix itself.
Right. No, you're right. And sometimes, and often, excuse me, it really is small changes that make the biggest difference. Cynthia is asking a question. I know in your sleep, you probably utter gene acronyms. She's asking to list all the gene names. I'm assuming not every gene that we test for, but the ones most relevant to hormones. She also mentions having performed some DNA testing that uses PCR, and the results were divided into sort of these sub-silos, just like we do at the DNA company, to make it very easy to understand. But what are the gene names that most people listening in this evening need to be familiar with as it pertains to hormones?
Okay. So I did, speak of these and list them earlier, but I'll do them briefly again. In the hormone reports, some of the main genes that you'll be looking at specifically that work into the determination of your hormone profile, how you metabolize estrogen. This would be the CYP17A1, your SRD5A2, Andro-X, which will show up as like AR, androgen receptor. By the way, I do want to mention, because we may have some males out there listening in wanting to support their beautiful, wonderful females. But the Andro-X, the X is because the androgen receptor, this particular gene is passed through the female, through the X chromosome, not through the Y. So women will actually see two letters. They could have, say, a CC, they could have a CT, they could have a TT. But if you are male, and we are talking genetically, like born genetic male XY chromosomes, okay, you will only have really one. You only get it through the X chromosome, not the Y. Now you may see like a CC or a TT. You will never see a CT. Okay. You will never see a heterozygous as a male because, like I said, the Y chromosome doesn't carry that. So just a little thing there that, if you ever do, if you're a male and you see a CT, then you might want to double check to make sure that your sample was not, you didn't have somebody else's spit in there, or something. So just wanted to throw that out there. So that's your Andro-X or your AR gene. The CYP19A1 gene, remember I said that this is the aromatase gene. Your UGT gene, so this is the UGT 2B17 and 2B15. This is the glucuronidation, helps for the clearance of testosterone and androgens and some estrogen. Also the CYP1A1, that is associated with the 2-hydroxyestrone metabolites, CYP1B1, that's associated with the 4-hydroxyestrone metabolite, and the CYP3A4 gene, which is associated with the 16-alpha-hydroxyestrone metabolite. And then, of course, looking at your detoxification pathways. So glutathione conjugation pathway, these are your GST genes. So GSTT1, GSTM as in Mary 1, these are copy number variants. Your DNA test may not have looked at that because a lot of the genetic testings don't look at copy number variants, indels, insertion deletions that we do. So this kind of information may be lacking in your testing, but is very, very important. We also look at GST P as in Paul 1 as part of that pathway. And then, of course, antioxidation. So your SOD2, GPX, also your methylation. Methylation, we have a whole suite of genes that we look at, including your MTHFR. There's actually 2 MTHFR genes that we look at, SHMT1, MTRR, MTR, as well as the FUT2 gene. That's how B12 is transported from the gut into the bloodstream. And of course, COMT, COMT, and your vitamin Ds. So that's your CYP2R1, your GC gene, which is the vitamin D binding protein gene for transport, and your VDR gene, which is the vitamin D receptor. So those are really the highlights, but honestly, all the genes work in some way. But those are some of the main ones related to hormones.
Our tech team is saying Dr. Varden's mic was off the entire time. Can she repeat that really quick one more time?
You got to be kidding me.
Deborah, that was great, by the way. Thank you. That's a standalone webinar. Somebody can listen to that all over again, get the whole education, on the hormone pathways. So there you go, Cynthia. Enjoy. Deborah's asking.
No, I did that quickly, but this is recorded. You can go back, pause, write it down.
So. Right. I told you she does gene acronyms in her sleep. So there's a case history here. We'll be fast about it. 53 years old, many symptoms of perimenopause, thinning hair, regular periods, joints, aches, creaks. She's done her profile and shows that she's estrogen dominant. So that's the CYP17A1, 1981 fast pathway, lacking GST gene for gut detox. So GSTM1, excuse me, moderate methylation, severe hyperemesis during both pregnancies. And in hindsight, thinks because she could not break down hormones in her gut, possibly been diagnosed with hormone imbalance, evidenced by an ovarian cyst. Well, one cyst wouldn't necessarily say all that much. Bioidentical hormone plant sources like soy make her feel unwell, including yam. These are phytoestrogens. What can I do to manage my hormones and support detox during this period of my life? So 53. I actually think you answered this. As I listened to my, so she feels like maybe we even answered some of the questions by the time she actually finished that long question, which is a great question. It's a middle case history. I mean, yeah. So I think so that came through at 5:55. I think we did talk about addressing estrogen dominance. The cruciferous vegetables. I'd be remiss. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the importance of fiber. It's not a nutrient. Well, it can be considered as a nutrient. I don't know. It's not a micronutrient, that's for sure. But I don't think I know as a society we're fiber deficient. So, and I'm not one to endorse, whole grains, but nonetheless, gluten-free whole grains, legumes, chia seeds, that kind of thing, soluble fiber to support the microbiome that helps to manage excess estrogen. In fact, if you're thinking some of this might start in the gut, phytoestrogens, if they're not options, flax seeds, they're milder. Maybe you're not reacting to those, but not, anyways, omega 3s, right? But then that calcium D-glucarate, I find that helps so many people if, in fact, there is that estrogen dominant status. I don't know what your thoughts are. Of course, supporting, detoxification, milk thistle, NAC, glutathione
And
itself.
and here's where, um, to really hone in on the specificity
Right.
on what would really help, having, to be able to look at your DNA results, to be able to say, oh, okay, well, you don't process, these particular micronutrients very well, or your vitamin D pathway is off, or, oh, hey, for your methylation pathway. I mean, granted, she says lacking the GSTT, one gene for gut detox. The thing is that moderate methylation, well, specifically in what
Yeah,
fashion?
she thinks well, here's the thing with that sort of halfway description. We want to see like the devil in the details. See like
Yes.
so that's a very complete question. It's very detailed, but it's actually not detailed enough for what we really need to answer in full complexity. So, and also, by the way, monitoring. So not just knowing your genes are one and done. We have a lot of tests that help to understand what else, functional testing. So microbiome, looking at the DNA aging test, a wonderful way. It's a methyl clock to determine your biological age versus your chronological age, which is an indirect but nonetheless reflective of your overall sort of generalized health status. Liver function tests, Dutch hormone tests, nutrient levels, all these different things that we can do at the DNA company, especially when you consult with one of our experts. So, but that, severe hyperemesis history. I don't, might maybe difficulty metabolizing hormones, as she alluded to. So like an extra focus on liver, gut, digestive enzymes. All these things are important to look into. But along with yourself, there's a bunch of other clinicians in the DNA company that can dive deep, into the genes and understand them from a very complete perspective. So
Right.
highly endorse that.
It is
Uh,
difficult to give, specificity of, recommendations when we don't have all of that. And that really would not be prudent on us, to be doing that because we don't have that information. So
yeah.
really, this is more of, general educational information. And this goes with a lot of the questions, that people provide for us. There's not a lot of room to put in a lot of history. And we also, don't want to put you in a fishbowl. but that's why having, working with someone like us who can then read and interpret all of this information is really important, because, but even then, general information, like you're saying, soy makes her feel unwell. Well, soy in the US and even in Canada, they spray um,
Glyphosate.
pesticides. You're looking at atrazine, you're looking at a different glyphosate. These are all endocrine disruptors. So if you are going to be doing any kind of soy, which can affect your hormones, do something that is organic, fermented, and so on and so forth. But if you are that sensitive, stay away from soy. Obviously, your hormones are so sensitive that even that is just throwing things off. And this is where finding and recognizing where toxic loads, toxic exposures come in, where these endocrine disruptors, estrogen mimetics come in, and lowering that exposure. And then maybe you won't be so sensitive to these other type of remedies. So
It just reminds me, these phytoestrogen in supplement form often help a lot of people, but they can make a lot of people like her, experience negative side effects. There's also a whole class of botanicals and herbs that are within this sort of generalized category of SERMs, right? Like selective estrogen regulating modulators. But there's one that comes to mind. I love this ingredient. It's a trifecta ingredient, actually, sort of Korean folklore, but it's being proven more and more, like 4 really well done human clinical trials on it. And it's called Estro G 100. That's not a product. It's an ingredient of 3 herbs: angelica, Sinanchum, and Phlomis. These 3 ingredients, and it's traditionally Chinese and Korean, but to alleviate menopausal symptoms. And it's not SERM. It's not selective estrogen modulating. It's not phytoestrogenic. In fact, they don't necessarily even understand the mechanism of action, and yet it manages 12 major primary menopausal symptoms. So look, something to look into. I just had to throw that out there because it's one of those that I've had great success with, really well done human clinical trials. And by the way, only in 3 months.
wow,
Significant improvement in 3 month. 3 months. Yes. Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
We've got another question here by D. She's saying, I'm genetically predisposed to be estrogen dominant and to store estradiol, estriol, DHEA, etc. HRT as estrone. So apparently she's doing some hormone replacement therapy, I'm assuming. Calcium D-glucarate works well. Actually, she said really well, but it's not a discriminator of hormones that it will clear out. She finds herself very tired using that. She said NAC, N-acetylcysteine, works better as more of a metabolizer. What's our opinion on NAC as an option? And she says she has the same issue with DIM, which you've talked about. And in perimenopause, she doesn't want to deplete what little estrogen she has. Now, I will say N-acetylcysteine, NAC, also called. That is a precursor of glutathione. So this is a key antioxidant that helps to neutralize and safely eliminate hormone metabolites, including harmful estrogen metabolites like 4-hydroxyestrone. So yeah, I personally love NAC. It helps with general detoxification support, not just in hormones, but obviously you get that. And this really works into what we were talking about at the very beginning, what you and your sister do, about what you did for detoxification. I'm sure that was probably in your arsenal of detoxification support. So yeah, I like that, for like calcium D-glucarate, DIM, those work more directly, on hormones, on
Yeah.
these metabolites, where NAC indirectly promotes that detoxification. So yeah, I mean, if you have any quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think also for some people, and again, this sounds like it's the glutathionization detox pathways that need, heavier expression, because it's not just exclusive to clearance. It NAC in indirect ways that we don't test for specifically might actually make the conversion of upstream DHEA convert into estrone naturally, estrone reserves. So that's a possible mechanism. But yeah, I think it's also good. I think it preserves estrogen levels while enhancing detox pathways. Why not? I mean, if you find something is effective, there's certainly no excess. It's hard to overdose something like that. So um, maybe some B vitamin. I mean, we're talking about, if it's an energy pathway, my head always goes to the citric acid cycle, and I'm always thinking magnesium and B complex, right? I mean, without
Right.
knowing for sure, kind of helpful to know where your methylation's at to determine what Bs, but B2, B3, B6, and some magnesium. Those are typically the ones I'd throw in there.
So let's jump over to another question. Lori is asking, she says, my understanding is that our genes are a blueprint, but they are not necessarily expressed. So it seems like other tests are required to identify what problems are actually in motion. Where does one start? Well, I would like to say what you start with is knowing what your blueprint is.
Right.
What's the hand you have been dealt? Okay. You've got to know what you're working with. So that way, you understand better how to upregulate or downregulate those genes with which you have to work. And I tell clients that think of genes not necessarily so much like a light switch, just turning them on and off, but think of them like a dimmer switch. Okay. So maybe you have this much of that gene to work with, another person has this much. Okay. A much more because they're optimal and you may be suboptimal. Well, you can upregulate or downregulate that gene. Okay. Based on this works into epigenetics, based on diet, lifestyle, toxic load, all of these different things that you can manipulate the genetic expression. And yeah, they're not necessarily expressed because due to DNA methylation, silencing the gene, obviously there's some genes we want silenced, others we don't. So how do we manipulate that expression? This is the core of epigenetics. And this really is how we work, that we look at the blueprint. What do we have to work with? Now, what can we do based on that information to best manipulate the expression of those genes?
Yeah.
And really, that's where you start. You look and you find out what do you have to work with. Know your DNA 360.
Yeah. And it's almost like, the genes are that's over also a little maybe oversimplified, but the genes are like the why, right? Like why is this happening? And then the functional testing that we often run, pharmacogenomics, microbiome, aging, that's like the lifetime what, like what's happening right now. So if you start with genetics, that's where you always want to start to map out potential concerns related to female health, hormones, et cetera. Then you layer in these functional tests for confirmation of what's happening, not only confirmation of what's happening now, but also as a bookend. Baseline is because you can't change your genes, just like Dr. Varden saying. You can manage genetic expression. That's epigenetics, but you can take actionable steps then for these personalized interventions, and that approach, the genetic plus functional, the why, and then the what. That approach ensures basically that you're going to have a real focus, laser-like focus on what matters for your unique presentation. That's the summary of I think of what we're talking about today.
So, jumping to the next question, Shelby asks, how does the DNA company test help when looking at skincare routines? You want to answer that one?
Oh boy. So there, typical dermatologist is going to talk about dissension, deflation, dehydration, like the 3 Ds. So many systems go into skin. It's not so simple as like, what is the oxidative stress levels, although that's often overly focused on. So hormones, methylation, those are the big ones that come to mind. Detoxification. You can actually tell phenotypically, visually, by looking at somebody often what their age some like plays a role, but what their either exposure to toxins, and by toxins I don't just mean the ethereal smoke plumes that billow out of industry. I mean, I'm talking and smoke. I'm talking about, radiation exposure, your own endotoxin exposure, how well you detoxify. This plays a huge role on aging. And I mean, aging is also, comes somewhat synonymous with, skin health. So I wouldn't say that there's really many systems. Vitamin D, the BCMO1 gene, which is how we convert vitamin A from beta carotene, preformed vitamin A. I'm not sure there's any. We have a wonderful anti-aging siloed report. I don't think there's really any system that we look at that doesn't relate to skin health and aging, indirect or direct.
It is the largest organ
Yeah.
on the body. I mean, it's one of the first things that will show if there is some dysbiosis going on. Because gut biome, releasing toxins, where does it? One of the first places you see it in your skin.
All right.
And this kind of works into the next question that Lori asks. She says her college daughter gets sick literally every month at the onset of her period. So frustrating and disruptive. Where does she start to address and resolve this? I would say get her DNA done. Let's see, where is she weak? Where does she need support? And also, working with someone who knows the questions to ask. What exposures is she coming in contact with where her immune system is being compromised, where she cannot handle these sicknesses, viruses, bacterial, whatever infections that she seems to be getting, where it is most weak right before her period or right at the start of her period. This is where, looking at her genetics, looking at her tests, we can see, oh, okay, here's the weak spot. This is what we need to do. But to say in general that it's,
I would guess, though, I would guess that this is a situation of estrogen dominance, either that or dual dominant. We see these co-dominant pictures, but when there's estrogen dominance, or again, like if there's a low progesterone, what you have, especially the luteal phase, as you know, progesterone peaks, and then of course it just drops. Like some people, it tanks further apropos an estrogen dominant state. So that basically creates a bit of a immune depression at that moment in the cycle. That would be my guess,
yeah.
among
So
other things.
yeah. But really where to start, I would definitely recommend, working with someone, because it might be something simple, whether it's food, whether it's particular sleep habits to strengthen.
College stress,
Yeah.
poor sleep, inconsistent eating. I mean, mhm.
Tweaking, just one or even a couple things could make all the difference.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and here, Jan actually has a couple of questions or a clarification on the other one. She said, if I wanted someone to go over my DNA results in person, answer questions, clarify inconsistencies, and what she meant by in person is like over the phone, virtual video. But clarifying inconsistencies and make specific recommendations, what would be the cost? Okay, so Jan, I would highly recommend you to contact our client care, or I would say for our angels, if you can pop in an email or the link that she should reach out to get some quotes and what would be most useful. If you can pop that in the chat for her, that would be fantastic, because we have several different programs that you can choose from, price points, but it's finding out what would work best for you. And you can always go to our website, thednacompany.com, and we have our coaching. There's like a drop down where you can see the different packages, pricing, and you can actually speak to one of our salespeople, to discuss what is best for you.
Yep.
And our last question of the night, Angela.
Great way to end it. Great way to end it, because it alludes to the fact. So the question was, does she need to stop all her vitamins and supplements before testing to get an accurate result? You can't change your genes no matter what you take. You can't modify the variations you have. You can, however, influence your genetic expression, and that's the whole point, right? So even as we're talking about uncovering how your DNA isn't just a blueprint, it's a map, right? It's instruction manual to better health and wellness. So you can't alter your DNA, but you can manage genetic expression. So you don't have to stop taking your vitamins, right? And also, and this is the biggest but takeaway, I suppose, is, where your genes aren't your destiny, there's this opportunity to make empowered choices. That's the point of this evening. And I just wanted to throw out this shameless plug one more time, that everyone wants to take advantage of this special offer that we have, which is DNA 360 and DNA Breast 360 are 15% off until midnight. We don't know yet if that's PST, but I'm assuming it is, with the code BFCM 2024.
Yes, and it is Pacific Standard
Is
Time.
it?
Midnight tonight. Yes, that was just put in. Thank you, our little angels. I really appreciate you. So absolutely. And don't forget that with our new program, the DNA for Women program that we're kicking off at the beginning of the year, if you want more information, if you want to be put on the wait list, please reach out to CEO at thednacompany.com, and we can answer questions and we can get you on the wait list for that particular program. I want to say thank you so much for all of you attending
Great
today.
questions.
Fantastic questions. I hope you are walking away with information, useful information, new pearls of wisdom for yourselves, for others, that you got out of it what you wanted and the reason of why you came to this webinar and attended today. We appreciate you. We are here because of you. So I want to say thank you. Dr. Bryce, you are just awesome. I love working with you.
You're awesome. You're awesome. I love it. I love hanging with you. I love chatting with you. I love science geeking with you. And thank you to everyone for joining in their wonderful input as you were describing. I hope everyone stays curious, empowered, and well.
So with that, adieu. Have a fantastic day, and we will see you at the next webinar. So
Stay well, everybody. Cheers.
get that music on.